The notification chimed at 3:47 a.m., the blue glow of my phone cutting through the darkness of my bedroom. Balance inquiry, $847.23. I blinked hard, certain I was misreading the numbers. Just yesterday, my checking account held $12,400. I sat up in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs as I refreshed the banking app again and again, hoping for a different result. The number remained unchanged, mocking me in bold digital font. My name is Sarah Chen, and at 28, I thought I had my life mapped out with military precision. I worked as a financial analyst at Morrison & Associates, a mid-sized investment firm in downtown Seattle. Just before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My colleagues often joked that I could spot a discrepancy in a spreadsheet from across the room, that numbers spoke to me in ways that people sometimes couldn't. They weren't wrong. I'd built my career on being detail-oriented, methodical, and above all, financially responsible. Every dollar in my accounts had a purpose. Every expense was tracked, and every investment was carefully researched. I lived in a cozy one-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Well, technically the bank owned most of it, but I was steadily chipping away at the mortgage with the discipline of someone who understood compound interest and the power of consistent payments. My furniture was a mix of IKEA finds and hand-me-downs from my older sister, but everything was clean, organized, and purposeful. I wasn't wealthy, but I was comfortable, and more importantly, I was in control. That control felt like a cruel joke now, as I stared at my phone screen in the pre-dawn darkness. The missing money wasn't just numbers on a screen, it represented months of careful budgeting, of choosing generic brands over name brands, of packing lunches instead of buying them, of saying no to dinner invitations when money was tight. Every missing dollar had been earned through late nights at the office, weekend work sessions, and the kind of grinding dedication that my generation was told would eventually pay off. I stumbled to my laptop, my hands shaking slightly as I logged into my banking portal. The desktop version had to show something different, some explanation for this nightmare. The larger screen only magnified my horror. Transaction after transaction, starting 3 weeks ago, showed withdrawals I'd never made. $500 here, $800 there, $1,200 the day before yesterday. Each withdrawal was marked as ATM various locations, with timestamps that made no sense. According to these records, I'd withdrawn $300 at 2:15 a.m. from an ATM in Tacoma, while I was sound asleep in my bed. Another $600 had supposedly been taken at 11:30 p.m., from a location in Everett during a time when I was having dinner with my coworker, Jessica, at a restaurant downtown, a dinner I could prove with credit card receipts and probably security footage. The room felt like it was spinning. I grabbed my purse and dumped everything onto my kitchen table, frantically searching for my debit card. It was there, exactly where it should be, the chip slightly worn from regular use, but otherwise normal. I checked my wallet 3 times, even though I knew what I'd find. The card had never left my possession. My first instinct was to call the bank's fraud hotline immediately, but something held me back. Maybe it was my analytical nature, or maybe it was the way my sister Rebecca had been acting lately, dismissive and oddly secretive whenever money came up in conversation. Instead, I spent the next hour methodically documenting everything. I took screenshots of every transaction, noted the times and locations, and cross-referenced them with my own whereabouts using my phone's location history, credit card statements, and even my work badge access logs. The pattern that emerged made my stomach churn. Every suspicious withdrawal occurred when I could prove I was somewhere else entirely. It wasn't random fraud. It was systematic, deliberate, and executed by someone who knew my schedule well enough to ensure I'd have an alibi for every transaction. By 6 a.m., I'd consumed 3 cups of coffee and filled a legal pad with notes. The evidence was overwhelming, but it painted a picture I didn't want to accept. This wasn't some stranger who'd somehow cloned my card or hacked my account. This was someone with intimate knowledge of my routines, someone who knew exactly when I'd be at work, when I'd be sleeping, when I'd be otherwise occupied. I tried calling Rebecca first, but it went straight to voicemail. Her cheerful greeting, "Hey, you've reached Becca, leave me something good," felt jarringly upbeat given my current crisis. I didn't leave a message. What would I say? "Hey sis, someone's been systematically draining my bank account, and I'm starting to wonder if it's you." Instead, I called my mother. Mom had always been an early riser, a habit left over from her years as a nurse working the morning shift at Swedish Medical Center. She answered on the second ring, her voice alert despite the early hour. "Sarah, honey, is everything okay? It's barely 6 in the morning. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." I tried to keep my voice steady, professional. "Have you noticed anything strange about Rebecca lately? Any changes in her spending habits or behavior?" There was a pause that lasted a beat too long. "Why would you ask something like that? Someone's been stealing from my bank account, and the pattern suggests it's someone who knows my schedule intimately. I'm trying to figure out who has access to my information." "Oh, Sarah," my mother's voice carried a note of exasperation that I'd heard countless times growing up. "You're being paranoid again. Rebecca would never do something like that. She's your sister." The word again hit me like a slap. Growing up, whenever I'd questioned discrepancies, missing birthday money, allowance that seemed smaller than what my parents claimed they'd given me, personal items that disappeared and reappeared in Rebecca's room, I'd been told I was being paranoid. It was a family narrative I'd internalized so deeply that I'd stopped trusting my own observations. "Mom, I'm not being paranoid. I have documentation. $11,000 is missing from my account, and every withdrawal happened when I can prove I was somewhere else." $11,000. Her voice shifted, concern replacing dismissal. "Are you sure? That seems like a lot for a bank error." "It's not a bank error. Someone with my debit card information has been systematically withdrawing money for weeks." "The question is who?" Another pause. "Have you called the bank?" "I'm going to, but first I need to understand if anyone in the family might know my banking information. Have you given anyone my social security number or banking details for any reason?" "Of course not. Sarah, you're scaring me. If someone really has stolen that much money from you, you need to call the police." I ended the call feeling more frustrated than when I'd started. My mother's initial defensiveness about Rebecca, followed by her suggestion to call the police, felt like deflection. In my family, we didn't call outsiders to solve our problems. We handled things internally, quietly, without making waves. By 7 a.m., I was dressed and ready for work, but I couldn't focus on anything except the printouts of my bank statements spread across my kitchen table. I'd highlighted every suspicious transaction in yellow, creating a timeline that made the theft's systematic nature undeniable. Whoever was doing this wasn't desperate or impulsive. They were methodical, patient and careful to stay under the radar. At Morrison & Associates, I tried to maintain my usual professional demeanor, but my mind kept drifting back to the missing money. During my lunch break, I drove to my bank's main branch, the same First Security Bank where I'd opened my first checking account at 16. The building was all glass and steel, designed to project stability and trustworthiness, qualities that felt mockingly absent from my current situation. Linda Ramirez, the customer service representative who helped me, had the kind of practiced sympathy that suggested she'd handled many similar cases. She pulled up my account and frowned at her screen, typing commands that brought up detailed transaction histories I couldn't see from my side of the desk. "Miss Chen, I can see why you're concerned. These withdrawal patterns are definitely unusual for your account." She scrolled through screens of data, her frown deepening. "The transactions were all authenticated with your PIN number and occurred at legitimate ATM locations throughout the Puget Sound area. But I never made those withdrawals. I can prove where I was during every single one of those transactions." Linda nodded sympathetically. "Unfortunately, the fact that the transactions were PIN authenticated makes this more complicated. Our fraud protection typically flags unusual locations or spending patterns, but these withdrawals were spread out geographically and temporally in a way that didn't trigger our automated systems." "What does that mean for recovering my money?" "We'll need to file a formal fraud report and conduct an investigation. This process typically takes 10 to 15 business days, during which we'll review security footage from the ATM locations and examine the transaction data more thoroughly." She handed me a stack of forms that felt impossibly thick. In the meantime, I'm issuing you a new debit card and closing this account. You'll need to update all your automatic payments and direct deposits. The bureaucratic machinery that would supposedly help me felt overwhelming. Each form required details I wasn't sure I could provide, exact dates, times, and locations for every transaction I wanted to dispute. The bank needed me to prove a negative that I wasn't at dozens of ATMs across the region over the past 3 weeks. Walking back to my car, I felt the weight of isolation settling over me. The bank couldn't help me immediately. My mother thought I was being paranoid. Rebecca wasn't answering her phone, and somewhere out there, someone was probably planning their next withdrawal from my rapidly dwindling account. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I left work early, claiming a family emergency. It wasn't entirely a lie. I drove to Rebecca's apartment in Fremont, a trendy neighborhood I could never afford on my salary. Her building was one of those converted warehouses with exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of place that rented for twice what I paid for my modest Capitol Hill apartment. Rebecca's car wasn't in her assigned parking spot, but I decided to wait.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I'd brought my laptop and used the time to continue my investigation, connecting to the building's guest Wi-Fi and diving deeper into my financial records. What I found made my hands tremble. The pattern of theft extended beyond my checking account. Small amounts had been disappearing from my savings account for months. $50 here, $100 there. Amounts so small I'd attributed them to bank fees or forgotten purchases. But when I added them up, they totaled nearly $3,000 in additional losses. More disturbing was the discovery that someone had been accessing my credit report. The alerts I'd been receiving and dismissing as promotional materials were actually notifications of legitimate inquiries. Someone had been researching my creditworthiness, my available credit limits, and my financial stability. Rebecca's BMW pulled into the parking spot at 6:30 p.m. The car was new, or at least newer than the Honda Civic she'd been driving the last time I'd seen her. She stepped out wearing clothes I didn't recognize. A designer jacket that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget and boots that looked Italian. She spotted me immediately and approached with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sarah, what a surprise. What brings you to my neighborhood? We need to talk, Becca. It's important." Her apartment was exactly what I'd expected. Minimalist, expensive, and perfectly curated for Instagram. The furniture was all clean lines and neutral colors, the kind of aesthetic that required both money and time to achieve. Fresh flowers sat in a vase that probably cost more than my monthly phone bill. "Can I get you something to drink? I have that sparkling water you like, or maybe some wine. I'm not here for a social visit." I pulled out my folder of bank statements and placed them on her glass coffee table. Someone has been stealing money from my accounts. $11,000 so far. Rebecca's face went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, concern, and something else I couldn't quite identify. "Oh my God, Sarah, that's terrible. Have you called the bank?" "The police?" "I've talked to the bank. But before I involve the police, I need to understand how someone got access to my PIN number and my personal information." "What do you mean?" "I mean that whoever is doing this knows my schedule well enough to only make withdrawals when I can prove I was somewhere else. They know my banking information, my spending patterns, and my routines. That narrows down the list of suspects significantly." Rebecca sat down across from me, her posture defensive. "You're not suggesting that I'm not suggesting anything yet. I'm asking direct questions and hoping for direct answers." I spread out the timeline I'd created. "These withdrawals started 3 weeks ago. That's right around the time you moved into this apartment. This place can't be cheap, and last time we talked, you were worried about making ends meet. I got a promotion at work. I told you about it. You mentioned a possible promotion. You never said it came through, and you never mentioned what kind of salary increase it involved." The silence stretched between us, filled with years of unspoken tension. Rebecca had always been the favored child, the one who got help with rent when times were tough, the one who received family loans that were never expected to be repaid. I'd been the responsible one, the one who figured things out on her own, the one who never asked for help. "Sarah, I know how this looks, but you have to believe me. I would never steal from you. You're my sister, then help me figure out who would. Who else knows my banking information? Who else has access to my personal details? Rebecca stood up and walked to her kitchen, ostensibly to get water but really to put distance between us. Have you considered that maybe someone stole your wallet and copied your information, or that your card was skimmed at a restaurant or gas station? My card never left my possession, and skimming wouldn't give someone my PIN number. Maybe you wrote it down somewhere, or used an obvious combination like your birthday. The suggestion that I'd been careless with my financial information stung because it played into every stereotype about people who became victims of financial crime. Rebecca knew better than anyone how meticulous I was about security. She'd teased me countless times about my password complexity and my habit of checking my account balance daily. Becca, my PIN is random numbers that I've never written down or shared with anyone. The only way someone could know it is if they watched me enter it repeatedly or if I told them directly. She returned to the living room with a glass of water she didn't seem interested in drinking. Look, I understand you're upset and scared. That's a lot of money to lose. But accusing family members isn't going to help you get it back. I'm not accusing anyone. I'm investigating. There's a difference, is there? Because it feels like you've already made up your mind about who you think is responsible. The conversation was going nowhere. Rebecca's responses felt rehearsed, like she'd been preparing for this confrontation. Every question I asked was deflected with another question or redirected back to my supposed paranoia. I gathered my papers and stood to leave. If you think of anything that might help me figure out who has access to my information, please call me. And Becca, if you know something you're not telling me, now would be the time to come clean. This is going to get worse before it gets better. As I reached the door, Rebecca called out, "Sarah, I hope you find whoever did this. But don't let it make you suspicious of everyone who loves you." The drive home felt surreal. Seattle's evening traffic moved around me in its usual patterns while my world felt fundamentally altered. The sister I'd grown up with, shared secrets with, and defended against playground bullies was now my primary suspect in a crime that could devastate my financial future. Back in my apartment, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. I opened my laptop and began researching private investigators. If my family wasn't going to help me find the truth, and if the bank's investigation would take weeks, I needed to take control of the situation myself. The first PI I contacted, Marcus Webb, was a former Seattle police detective who specialized in financial crimes. His website was professional but not flashy, filled with testimonials from clients who'd recovered stolen money and caught embezzling employees. His initial consultation fee was $200, money I could barely afford to spend, given my current situation, but money I couldn't afford not to spend, if it led to recovering my savings. We scheduled a meeting for the following afternoon. In the meantime, I spent the evening documenting everything I could remember about Rebecca's recent behavior changes. The new apartment, the expensive clothes, the evasiveness about her promotion, and most troubling, her immediate defensiveness when I'd asked about my missing money. I also called our mutual friends, carefully framing my questions as concern for Rebecca's well-being, rather than suspicion about her finances. What I learned painted a picture of someone living well beyond her means. Rebecca had been picking up dinner checks, buying rounds of drinks, and making purchases that seemed inconsistent with her previous financial constraints. My friend Katie mentioned that Rebecca had paid for a weekend spa retreat for their entire group, a $1,200 expense that she'd brushed off as a little splurge. Another friend, Alex, commented that Rebecca had been unusually generous lately, offering to pay for activities and events that she'd previously declined due to cost. The more I learned, the clearer the picture became. Rebecca was spending money freely, starting exactly 3 weeks ago, when my account began hemorrhaging funds. The timing wasn't coincidental, it was evidence that night. I lay awake staring at my ceiling, processing the magnitude of what I was beginning to understand. This wasn't just theft, it was betrayal by the person I'd trusted most in the world. The sister who'd borrowed my clothes, shared my secrets, and been my closest family member, had systematically stolen my financial security. The emotional weight of that realization was almost unbearable. I'd spent my adult life building careful financial stability, and Rebecca had unraveled it with the casual efficiency of someone who felt entitled to my resources. Every late night I'd worked, every small pleasure I'd denied myself, every dollar I'd saved had been stolen by someone who claimed to love me. But even more devastating was the recognition that this betrayal had been enabled by a family dynamic I'd never fully understood. Rebecca had always been protected, always been given second chances, always been excused for her financial irresponsibility. And I had always been expected to be self-sufficient, to handle my own problems, to not make waves. When I'd called my mother that morning, her immediate defensiveness of Rebecca hadn't been about protecting an innocent daughter. It had been about protecting the family structure that allowed Rebecca's behavior to continue unchecked. I wasn't just fighting to recover my money, I was fighting against decades of established family patterns that had made me vulnerable to this theft. As dawn broke over Seattle, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to be the responsible sister who quietly absorbed this loss to keep the peace. I wasn't going to accept my mother's dismissal of my concerns as paranoia, and I wasn't going to let Rebecca continue spending my money while pretending to be the victim of my suspicions. I was going to find proof of what she'd done, recover every penny she'd stolen, and hold her accountable for betraying my trust. Even if it meant exposing secrets that would tear our family apart, even if it meant admitting that the person I'd loved and defended my entire life had been systematically exploiting me. The girl who'd been called paranoid for noticing when things didn't add up was about to prove that her instincts had been right all along, and this time I had the evidence to back up every accusation I was preparing to make. Marcus Webb's office was located in a nondescript building in Pioneer Square, the kind of place where serious business happened away from curious eyes. The waiting room had the sterile efficiency of a doctor's office, but the magazines were about security systems and financial crime prevention rather than health and wellness. I arrived 15 minutes early, clutching a manila folder thick with printouts and evidence I'd compiled over the past 24 hours. When Marcus emerged from his inner office, he looked exactly like Central Casting would order for a private investigator, mid-50s, graying hair, weathered face that suggested he'd seen enough human nature to surprise very little. His handshake was firm, his eye contact direct, and his demeanor suggested competence without false reassurance. His office was spartanly furnished, but organized with military precision. 2 filing cabinets, a desk with multiple monitors, and walls covered with certificates and commendations from his police career. No family photos, no personal touches that might suggest vulnerability or distraction from the work at hand. Miss Chen, I've reviewed the preliminary information you provided over the phone. Before we proceed, I need you to understand that financial investigations involving family members often reveal information that clients find difficult to accept. Are you prepared for that possibility? I opened my folder and spread the timeline across his desk. Mr. Webb, in the past 3 days, I've discovered that someone close to me has stolen over $14,000 from my accounts. I've moved past hoping for comfortable answers. He studied my documentation with the methodical attention of someone accustomed to separating facts from assumptions. This pattern suggests someone with intimate knowledge of your routines and access to your personal information. The geographical spread of the ATM locations indicates planning and deliberate misdirection. What can you tell me about the locations where the withdrawals occurred? Marcus pulled up a map on one of his monitors and began entering the ATM addresses I'd provided. Red dots appeared across the greater Seattle area, creating a pattern that made my stomach sink. These locations form a rough circle around your sister's workplace and residence. Someone familiar with her daily routines would naturally know these areas. But that could be coincidental. Rebecca and I grew up in the same area. We have mutual friends. There are dozens of reasons someone might know those neighborhoods. True, but look at the timing. He highlighted specific transactions on my timeline. These withdrawals occurred during your sister's lunch breaks, after her typical work hours, and on weekends when she would normally be free to travel to these locations. The evidence was damning, but Marcus wasn't finished. He pulled up additional screens showing sophisticated tracking software. I'd like your permission to conduct surveillance on your sister for the next week. This will involve monitoring her movements, photographing her activities, and documenting any interactions with your financial accounts. The idea of hiring someone to spy on Rebecca felt like crossing a line I could never uncross. What exactly would that involve? Discreet observation of her daily activities, documentation of her spending patterns, and if possible, photographic evidence of any suspicious behavior. I'll also run a comprehensive background check to determine if she has any undisclosed debts, addictions, or financial pressures that might motivate this theft. I signed the contract and wrote a check that represented most of my remaining available funds. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was spending money I could barely afford to recover money that had already been stolen, but the alternative was accepting a devastating loss and allowing Rebecca to continue her theft unchecked. That evening, I received a text from Rebecca that made my blood run cold. "Hey sis, been thinking about our conversation yesterday. Want to grab dinner tomorrow? My treat. I know a place you'll love." The casual tone, the offer to pay for dinner, the suggestion that she was financially comfortable enough to treat me, it all felt like salt in an open wound. But it also presented an opportunity. If Marcus was right about conducting surveillance, dinner with Rebecca might provide the evidence we needed. I responded with enthusiasm I didn't feel. "Sounds great. Where did you have in mind?" Her reply came quickly. "Canlis. 8 p.m. tomorrow. Dress nice. We're celebrating." Canlis was one of Seattle's most expensive restaurants, the kind of place where dinner for two could easily cost $400. The fact that Rebecca was proposing to take me there, using money that might very well be mine, felt like a deliberate taunt. I called Marcus immediately. "She wants to take me to dinner tomorrow night at Canlis. Should I go?" "Absolutely. But I want you wired for audio, and I'll have a surveillance team in position to document everything. If she's been stealing from you, her behavior during an expensive dinner might provide crucial evidence." The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. At work I found myself staring at spreadsheets without seeing them, my mind consumed with questions about how the evening would unfold. My colleague David noticed my distraction during our afternoon meeting. "Sarah, you seem really off lately. Everything okay at home?" I wanted to confide in someone, to share the burden of suspecting my own sister of systematic theft. But the words stuck in my throat. How do you explain that your family has become a crime scene without sounding paranoid or vindictive? "Just some personal financial stuff I'm trying to sort out. Nothing major." David's expression suggested he didn't believe me, but he had the decency not to push. "Well, if you need someone to talk through anything, I'm here. Sometimes an outside perspective helps." His offer of support made me realize how isolated I'd become. The theft wasn't just stealing my money, it was stealing my ability to trust, to confide, to maintain normal relationships with people who cared about me. At 6 p.m., I met Marcus at his office to be fitted with a recording device. The equipment was surprisingly sophisticated, a tiny microphone that clipped inside my blouse, and a recording unit the size of a credit card that fit discreetly in my purse. "The audio quality will be excellent as long as you're within normal conversation distance. Try to keep the conversation flowing naturally, but if she makes any admissions about financial difficulties or unusual income sources, encourage her to elaborate. What if she suspects something? Then we'll know she's more sophisticated than we initially assumed. But based on her behavior so far, she seems confident that you're not seriously investigating her." I arrived at Canlis wearing my most expensive dress, feeling like an actress playing a role in a tragedy. The restaurant was everything I'd expected: stunning views of Lake Union, impeccable service, and prices that made my eyes water. Rebecca was already seated at a prime table by the window, looking radiant in a black dress I'd never seen before. "Sarah, you look amazing. I'm so glad we're doing this." She stood to embrace me, and I had to resist the urge to stiffen. The hug felt like a lie, warm and sisterly on the surface, but hollow underneath. As we sat down, I noticed her jewelry, diamond earrings, and a bracelet that caught the light expensively. "This place is incredible, Becca. I can't believe you got a reservation on such short notice." "I have my ways," she smiled conspiratorially. "Besides, my sister deserves the best. We don't celebrate each other enough." The server approached with menus that didn't list prices, never a good sign for someone on a budget. Rebecca ordered a bottle of wine that I knew cost more than my monthly car payment, dismissing my protests with a wave of her hand. "Don't worry about the cost tonight. I told you we're celebrating." "What exactly are we celebrating?" "Life, success, family." She raised her glass in a toast. "To my brilliant sister who always lands on her feet." The irony of toasting my resilience, while she systematically undermined my financial stability, was almost too much to bear. I forced a smile and clinked glasses, the recording device in my purse capturing every word. Throughout dinner, Rebecca regaled me with stories about her recent successes at work, her new apartment, and her plans for the future. She spoke with the casual confidence of someone whose financial worries had recently disappeared, describing purchases and plans that seemed inconsistent with her previously modest salary. I'm thinking about taking a vacation to Europe this summer. Paris, maybe Rome. I've always wanted to see the art museums there. That sounds expensive. Has your promotion been that significant? Let's just say I've learned to be more strategic about my finances. Sometimes opportunities present themselves in unexpected ways. The phrase sent chills down my spine. Was she talking about learning to steal more effectively? Or was I reading sinister meanings into innocent statements? As the evening progressed, Rebecca became more expansive, possibly due to the expensive wine she was consuming freely. She talked about feeling like she'd finally found her footing financially, about no longer having to worry about making ends meet. You know, Sarah, I've always admired how you handle money. You're so disciplined, so careful with every dollar. I used to think I could never be like that. And now I realize there are different ways to be smart about money. Not everyone has to follow the same path. I leaned forward, hoping the microphone would capture every nuance of her voice. What do you mean by different paths? Just that there are opportunities everywhere, if you know how to recognize them. Sometimes the solution to your problems is closer than you think. When the check arrived, Rebecca insisted on paying despite my offers to split it. She produced a credit card I didn't recognize, a premium card that suggested either excellent credit or substantial income. The total was $387, a sum she handed over without any visible concern. As we left the restaurant, Rebecca suggested we stop at a nearby bar for one more drink. The venue she chose was upscale, the kind of place where cocktails cost $20, and the crowd consisted of people who didn't need to check their bank balances before ordering. I love coming here, Rebecca said, settling into a plush booth. The atmosphere is so sophisticated. How often do you come to places like this? More often lately. I've decided life's too short to deny yourself nice things. She ordered top-shelf liquor with the ease of someone accustomed to expensive tastes. The bartender seemed to recognize her, suggesting this wasn't her first visit. Everything about her behavior indicated someone whose financial circumstances had dramatically improved in recent weeks. Becca, can I ask you something personal? The last time we talked seriously about money, you were stressed about making rent. What changed? For the first time that evening, her confident demeanor flickered. Things just worked out. Sometimes life surprises you. But specifically, what worked out? Did you get a raise? A bonus? Win the lottery? Sarah, why are you interrogating me? Can't you just be happy that I'm doing well? The defensive edge in her voice was exactly what Marcus had warned me to listen for. Innocent people typically enjoyed sharing details about positive changes in their lives. Guilty people deflected questions about unexplained prosperity. I'm not interrogating you. I'm interested in my sister's life. If there's some strategy or opportunity I should know about, I'd love to hear it. Rebecca finished her drink quickly and checked her phone. Actually, I should probably head home. Early morning tomorrow. The evening ended abruptly, with Rebecca calling an Uber despite my offer to drive her home. As her car pulled away, I sat in my own vehicle in the restaurant parking lot processing what I'd witnessed. The expensive dinner, the casual attitude toward money, the defensive responses to questions about her financial situation, it all painted a picture of someone living beyond their legitimate means. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Team observed subject throughout evening. She paid for dinner with card linked to account opened 3 weeks ago. Same time frame as your theft began. We have photos of her using ATM after dropping you off. Full report tomorrow. The next morning brought devastating confirmation of my worst fears. Marcus's office felt smaller somehow, the walls seeming to close in as he spread photographs and documents across his desk. The surveillance team had been thorough, documenting Rebecca's activities with the methodical precision of a criminal investigation. Your sister visited 4 different ATMs after leaving you last night. Each withdrawal was for the maximum daily limit of $500. He showed me a series of photographs taken with telephoto lenses. Rebecca at various machines, her face clearly visible, her body language casual and familiar with the process. But how is she accessing my account? I still have my debit card. Marcus opened a folder containing the most damning evidence yet. We traced the account she used to pay for dinner. It was opened 3 weeks ago with an initial deposit of $8,000 cash. The timing coincides exactly with the beginning of your theft. He pulled up additional documentation. We also discovered that your sister has been having financial difficulties far more severe than she's admitted. She's behind on her rent by 3 months. She has outstanding credit card debt exceeding $15,000, and she recently had her car repossessed. But she drove a BMW to dinner, rental, paid for with cash advance from the same credit card she used at the restaurant. The scope of Rebecca's deception was staggering. Not only was she stealing from me, but she was using my money to create an elaborate facade of financial success. Every expensive purchase, every generous gesture, every casual display of prosperity was funded by my systematically drained accounts. How is she accessing my account without my debit card? Marcus pulled up a technical report that made my head spin. She had a duplicate card made. Our investigation revealed that someone used your personal information to request a replacement card 6 weeks ago, claiming the original was lost. The duplicate was mailed to a P.O. box registered under a slightly different version of your name. That's impossible. I would have been notified if someone ordered a replacement card, not if they had access to your email account and deleted the notifications before you saw them. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Rebecca hadn't just stolen my money, she'd been monitoring my email, intercepting my bank communications, and systematically covering her tracks. The level of premeditation and technical sophistication was far beyond anything I'd imagined. Marcus continued his presentation with the thoroughness of a prosecutor building a case. We also discovered that your sister has been researching your financial accounts for months. Browser history from her laptop shows repeated visits to your bank's website, credit monitoring services, and financial planning resources. How did you get access to her browser history? Let's just say our investigation was comprehensive. The evidence was overwhelming, but Marcus wasn't finished. He produced a series of photographs showing Rebecca meeting with unknown individuals at various locations around the city. We believe your sister may be involved with a larger identity theft ring. These meetings suggest she's either selling your information to others or learning techniques for more sophisticated financial crimes. The possibility that Rebecca had shared my personal information with strangers made me physically ill. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the complete violation of my privacy and security. Every aspect of my financial life had been compromised by someone I'd trusted completely. What are my options now? Marcus's expression was grim. You have enough evidence for criminal charges that would almost certainly result in conviction. Grand theft, identity fraud, and conspiracy charges could send your sister to prison for 5 to 10 years. And if I don't want to press criminal charges, then she continues stealing from you until there's nothing left to take. Based on her escalating behavior and mounting debts, she's not going to stop voluntarily. That afternoon, I took the most difficult step of my life. I drove to the Seattle Police Department and filed a formal complaint against my sister for grand theft and identity fraud. Detective Patricia Rodriguez, who specialized in financial crimes, reviewed my evidence with the same methodical attention Marcus had shown. Miss Chen, I've seen a lot of financial fraud cases, but this level of systematic theft by a family member is particularly disturbing. The fact that she's been monitoring your email and potentially sharing your information with others elevates this beyond simple sibling disputes. What happens next? We'll obtain a warrant for her arrest based on the evidence you've provided. Given the amount stolen and the sophisticated nature of the fraud, bail will likely be set quite high. How long before she's arrested? Typically within 24 to 48 hours. I should warn you that arrest warrants in financial crimes cases sometimes leak to family members beforehand. You might want to secure any remaining assets and prepare for your sister to contact you. I spent the rest of the day changing passwords, setting up new bank accounts, and preparing for what I knew would be the most difficult confrontation of my life. The sister who had shared my childhood, my secrets, and my trust was about to become a criminal defendant in a case I had initiated. That evening, my phone rang. Rebecca's name appeared on the caller ID, and I knew that our carefully constructed facade of normalcy was about to crumble forever. "Sarah, we need to talk." Now, Rebecca's voice carried an edge I'd never heard before, sharp with desperation and barely contained panic. "Sarah, we need to talk." "Now, what about?" I kept my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Don't play games with me. I know what you've been doing. The surveillance, the investigation, all of it. We need to meet face to face and work this out before it goes too far." The fact that she knew about Marcus's surveillance meant either she was more observant than we'd given her credit for, or someone had warned her. Either possibility suggested this conversation wouldn't go the way I'd imagined it during all those sleepless nights. "Where do you want to meet?" "Volunteer Park. The conservatory." 30 minutes. The line went dead before I could respond. I immediately called Marcus, my hands shaking as I dialed. "She knows about the surveillance. She wants to meet at Volunteer Park in 30 minutes. Don't go alone. This could be dangerous if she's desperate enough. Let me send backup. She's my sister, not a violent criminal. Miss Chen, your sister has stolen over $14,000 from you, using sophisticated identity theft techniques. She's potentially involved with organized crime. Desperation makes people unpredictable." But I was already grabbing my keys. Some conversations could only happen between family members, without witnesses or backup, or the safety net of other people's protection. This was one of them. The conservatory at Volunteer Park was nearly empty at this hour, the glass building filled with tropical plants that created humid pockets of warmth in the evening air. Rebecca was waiting on a bench near the orchid display, but she looked nothing like the confident woman who had treated me to dinner just days earlier. Her hair was pulled back hastily, her clothes wrinkled, and her face showed the strain of someone who hadn't slept well in days. When she saw me approaching, she stood quickly, her movements nervous and erratic. "Thank you for coming. Start talking, Becca." She looked around to ensure we were alone, then sat back down heavily. "I know you've hired someone to follow me. I know you've been to the police. I know you think I'm some kind of criminal. Are you?" The direct question seemed to catch her off guard. For a moment the sister I remembered flickered across her face, vulnerable, uncertain, looking to me for guidance the way she had when we were children. "It's not what you think. It's not that simple." "Then explain it to me. Make me understand how my sister became someone who steals from my bank account and lies about it for weeks." Rebecca's composure cracked. Tears started flowing as she spoke, her words tumbling out in a rush of confession and justification. "I was drowning, Sarah. Do you understand that? Not struggling, not having a hard time drowning. I owed money to people who don't accept late payments, people who made it very clear what would happen if I didn't pay them back." "What people? What kind of debt are you talking about?" "I got involved with some investment opportunities that didn't work out. High risk, high reward situations that promised quick returns. When they failed, I owed money to investors who expected their principal back regardless of market performance." The euphemisms she was using, investment opportunities, market performance, sounded like she was describing legitimate business dealings. But the fear in her voice suggested something much more dangerous. "How much money are we talking about?" $40,000, plus interest that compounds daily. The number hit me like a physical blow. My stolen savings wouldn't even cover half of what she owed, which meant this theft was just the beginning of whatever scheme she'd gotten involved with. "Why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you ask for help instead of stealing from me?" "Because you would have said no." The words exploded out of her with years of pent-up resentment. "Because you would have lectured me about financial responsibility, and making better choices and living within my means. Because you would have made me feel like a failure for needing help. So instead you decided to make me the victim of your poor choices. I was going to pay it back. Every penny. I just needed time to figure out a solution. By continuing to steal from me. By creating fake bank accounts and monitoring my email. By involving other people in identity theft." Rebecca's face went pale. "You don't understand what you're getting involved with. If you press charges, if this becomes public, it won't just hurt me. These people I owe money to, they don't like attention, they don't like their business becoming part of police investigations. Are you threatening me? I'm trying to protect you. If you drop the charges, If you let me handle this quietly, I can make sure you get your money back and keep you out of danger." The conversation felt surreal. My sister was simultaneously confessing to stealing from me while positioning herself as my protector from consequences she had created. The manipulation was so sophisticated that I almost found myself considering her proposal. "How exactly would you get my money back if you owe $40,000 to dangerous people?" Rebecca glanced around nervously before answering. "There are other opportunities, other ways to generate income quickly. But I need time and I need the police investigation to go away. Other opportunities like stealing from more family members. Like expanding your identity theft operation. It's not like that." "Then what is it like? Explain to me exactly how you plan to repay stolen money while owing even more to loan sharks or whoever these people are." Rebecca stood up abruptly, pacing among the tropical plants like a caged animal. "You don't get it, Sarah. You've never been in a position where you had to choose between family loyalty and self-preservation. Everything has always worked out for you. You've never had to make desperate choices. I've never had to make desperate choices, because I've never lived beyond my means or gotten involved with criminals." There it is. She turned to face me, her expression hardening. The judgment, the superiority. "This is exactly why I couldn't come to you for help. Don't turn this around on me. I didn't create your financial problems, and I didn't force you to steal from me instead of asking for help. No, but you created an environment where asking for help felt impossible, where any financial mistake was treated like a character flaw, where being successful was the only way to earn respect in this family." The accusation stung because it contained a grain of truth. I had taken pride in my financial independence, and I had looked down on Rebecca's impulsive spending and lack of planning. But that didn't justify theft. "Even if everything you're saying is true, it doesn't give you the right to steal from me. I know that." Her voice broke. "I know it was wrong, but I didn't know what else to do. You could have gotten a second job. You could have sold your belongings. You could have declared bankruptcy. You could have asked our parents for help. You had dozens of options that didn't involve committing crimes. Our parents don't have money to lend. A second job wouldn't generate enough income fast enough. Bankruptcy doesn't protect you from the kind of people I owe money to. Then maybe you shouldn't have borrowed money from those people in the first place." Rebecca sat back down, her head in her hands. "You're right. You're absolutely right. I made terrible choices and now everyone I care about is paying the price." For a moment I felt the old protective instinct I'd always had toward my younger sister. She looked small and broken, genuinely remorseful for the pain she'd caused. But then I remembered the sophisticated planning her theft had required. The months of email monitoring, the casual way she'd spent my money on expensive dinners and fake displays of prosperity. "If you're really sorry, if you really want to make this right, then help me understand the full scope of what you've done. Who else is involved? What other crimes have been committed? How much danger am I actually in?" Rebecca's response chilled me to the bone. "The less you know, the safer you'll be. That's not your decision to make. I'm already involved whether I want to be or not. You involved me when you stole my identity and my money." She stood up again, pulling out her phone to check the time. "I have to go. These people I'm meeting with, they don't like to be kept waiting." "What people?" "Sarah, please. Drop the charges, let me handle this my way. I promise I'll find a way to pay you back, but I need you to trust me." "Trust you? After everything you've done, you're asking me to trust you? I'm asking you to save both our lives." She walked away quickly, leaving me alone among the tropical plants with more questions than answers. The conversation had confirmed my worst fears about Rebecca's criminal activity, while introducing new concerns about organized crime and physical danger that I wasn't prepared to handle. I called Marcus from my car, recounting the entire conversation while he listened without interruption. "Miss Chen, your sister's claims about dangerous creditors could be manipulation designed to make you drop the charges, or they could be legitimate threats that put you at risk. Either way, you need protection." "What kind of protection?" "Police escort home tonight. Temporary relocation while this investigation continues, and absolutely no further contact with your sister without law enforcement present." The idea of needing protection from consequences of my sister's actions felt like science fiction. But as I drove home through Seattle's evening traffic, I found myself checking my rearview mirror obsessively, wondering if Rebecca's mysterious creditors were already watching me. Detective Rodriguez called the next morning with news I'd been dreading. Miss Chen, we attempted to execute the arrest warrant for your sister yesterday evening, but she wasn't at her apartment. Her landlord says she moved out in the middle of the night, leaving no forwarding address. She's disappeared. It appears so. We've issued a BOLO alert and we're monitoring her credit cards and known associates. But sophisticated identity thieves often have resources for disappearing that make them difficult to track. The conversation with Detective Rodriguez lasted 20 minutes, during which she explained the steps they would take to locate Rebecca and the precautions I should take in the meantime. Change my daily routines, avoid predictable patterns, report any suspicious activity immediately. What about my money? If Rebecca's disappeared, how do I recover what she stole? That becomes much more complicated. If we can't locate her or her assets, recovery through criminal prosecution becomes unlikely. You'd need to pursue civil remedies, which could take years and might not be successful if she's hidden her assets effectively. The possibility that Rebecca might escape consequences while leaving me financially devastated felt like a final betrayal. Not only had she stolen my money, but she'd potentially structured her crimes in a way that made recovery impossible. 2 days later, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note in Rebecca's familiar handwriting. Sarah, this contains everything you need to understand what really happened. I'm sorry for the pain I've caused. Please be careful who you trust. Against Marcus's advice, I plugged the USB drive into my laptop. It contained dozens of files, bank records, email correspondence, and what appeared to be recordings of phone conversations. As I began reviewing the material, a horrifying picture emerged of criminal activity that extended far beyond what I had imagined. The bank records showed that Rebecca hadn't just stolen from me, she'd been systematically defrauding multiple family members, friends, and acquaintances using similar identity theft techniques. The scope of her crimes was staggering, over $200,000 stolen from more than a dozen victims over the past 18 months. The email correspondence revealed her involvement with a sophisticated criminal organization that specialized in financial fraud. Rebecca hadn't been a desperate amateur making bad choices, she'd been a professional criminal operating as part of a larger conspiracy. Most disturbing were the recorded phone conversations between Rebecca and her criminal associates. The discussions revealed plans to expand their operations, target additional victims, and eliminate evidence of their crimes. In one conversation, Rebecca specifically mentioned concern about my investigation and suggested that I might need to be handled if I didn't cooperate. The USB drive also contained what appeared to be an apology letter addressed to me, explaining that she'd been coerced into criminal activity by threats against family members. But given everything else I'd discovered, I couldn't determine whether this explanation was genuine or another layer of manipulation. I immediately turned the USB drive over to Detective Rodriguez, who reviewed its contents with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Within hours, the investigation had expanded from a simple theft case to a federal conspiracy investigation involving multiple jurisdictions. Miss Chen, your sister was involved in criminal activity far more serious than we initially understood. This organization has been operating in multiple states, and your case has provided crucial evidence for a larger investigation. What does that mean for recovering my money? The federal investigation has frozen several accounts associated with this criminal organization. There's a possibility you'll recover some of your losses through asset forfeiture proceedings, but that process could take years. The conversation with federal agents felt surreal. My search for answers about my missing savings had uncovered a criminal conspiracy that victimized dozens of people. Rebecca wasn't just my sister who had made bad choices, she was a federal fugitive wanted in connection with organized financial crimes. 3 months later, Rebecca was arrested in Portland, Oregon, attempting to use fake identification documents to open new bank accounts. The federal charges against her included conspiracy, identity theft, wire fraud, and money laundering. If convicted on all counts, she faced up to 20 years in federal prison. I attended her arraignment, sitting in the back of the courtroom and watching my sister plead not guilty to crimes I knew she had committed. She looked older, thinner, and more fragile than I remembered. When our eyes met across the courtroom, she mouthed the words, "I'm sorry," before being led away in handcuffs. The trial lasted 6 weeks. I testified about my stolen money, the investigation I'd conducted, and the evidence Rebecca had provided on the USB drive. The federal prosecutor painted a picture of systematic criminal activity designed to defraud vulnerable victims of their life savings. Rebecca's defense attorney argued that she'd been coerced into criminal activity by threats against family members, including me. They claimed she'd provided evidence to law enforcement because she wanted to protect her victims and help authorities dismantle the criminal organization. The jury convicted her on all charges. At sentencing, she was given 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to her victims. I recovered approximately 60% of my stolen money through asset forfeiture proceedings, but the emotional cost of the entire experience was far greater than any financial loss. 5 years later, I received a letter from Rebecca in federal prison. She wrote about taking responsibility for her choices, completing education programs, and hoping to rebuild her life after release. She asked for forgiveness and expressed genuine remorse for the pain she'd caused. I never responded to the letter. Some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive, and some relationships are too damaged to repair. The sister I'd grown up loving had disappeared long before she'd stolen my money, replaced by someone capable of systematic deception and criminal behavior that destroyed lives. But I'd learned something valuable from the experience. Trusting my instincts, investigating discrepancies, and refusing to accept dismissive explanations had probably saved me from even greater losses. The family members who'd called me paranoid for noticing irregularities had been wrong. Sometimes paranoia is just pattern recognition working properly. The experience changed how I approached relationships, finances, and trust. I became more protective of my personal information, more skeptical of convenient explanations, and more willing to investigate suspicious behavior rather than accepting reassuring lies. Most importantly, I learned that family loyalty doesn't require enabling destructive behavior or accepting financial abuse. Love doesn't mean overlooking crimes, and forgiveness doesn't require maintaining relationships with people who've proven themselves untrustworthy. Rebecca had taught me that sometimes the people closest to us are capable of the deepest betrayals. But she'd also taught me that I was stronger and more resourceful than I'd ever imagined. In trying to destroy my financial security, she'd helped me discover my own resilience and determination to fight for what was right. The money I recovered helped rebuild my savings, but the confidence I gained from refusing to be a victim was worth far more than any dollar amount. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come from the most painful experiences, and sometimes the people who hurt us the most also teach us the most about ourselves. 7 years had passed since Rebecca's conviction when I received an unexpected phone call at my new office in Portland. I'd relocated there after the trial, needing distance from Seattle and the memories that haunted every familiar street corner. My career had flourished in unexpected ways. The financial crime investigation skills I'd developed during Rebecca's case had led to consulting work with law enforcement agencies and private security firms. Ms. Chen, this is Special Agent Martinez with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. We have a situation that requires your expertise. The voice was professional but carried an urgency that made me set down my coffee and give her my full attention. After the Rebecca case, I'd occasionally consulted on similar family fraud investigations, helping victims navigate the complex process of building cases against relatives who'd stolen from them. What kind of situation? We've arrested 3 individuals connected to the same criminal organization your sister was involved with. During the investigation, we discovered evidence suggesting there may be additional victims who haven't come forward. We'd like your help identifying and contacting these potential victims. The idea of diving back into that world made my stomach clench. I'd spent years rebuilding my life, creating distance from the trauma of discovering my sister's criminal activities. The thought of willingly immersing myself in similar cases felt like voluntarily reopening old wounds. Agent Martinez, I appreciate the request, but I'm not sure I'm the right person for this. That case was deeply personal for me. That's exactly why you're the right person. You understand the psychology of family fraud victims better than anyone. You know what signs they miss, what excuses they make, and how to help them recognize they're being victimized. I found myself agreeing to meet with Agent Martinez the following day, driven by a sense of obligation to people who might be experiencing the same confusion and betrayal I'd endured. The FBI field office in Portland was sterile and intimidating, but Agent Martinez herself was surprisingly warm and direct. She spread files across the conference table, each representing a potential victim of the criminal organization Rebecca had been part of. The scope was staggering: dozens of families across multiple states, with losses ranging from thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars. The organization operated in cells, with family members recruited to target their own relatives.
Your sister's cell was just one of many, but it was particularly successful because of the sophisticated techniques they used. As I reviewed the case files, a disturbing pattern emerged. In family after family, the victims had initially suspected their relatives, but been told they were being paranoid, dramatic, or vindictive. The gaslighting was systematic, designed to make victims doubt their own perceptions while the theft continued. How many people are we talking about? Based on the financial records we've recovered, we estimate over 300 victims across 15 states. Many have never reported the crimes because they don't want to pursue charges against family members. The scale of the operation was breathtaking. Rebecca hadn't been a desperate individual making bad choices. She'd been part of a sophisticated criminal enterprise that systematically exploited family relationships for financial gain. Agent Martinez showed me photographs of the arrested suspects, and I was shocked to recognize one of them. Maria Santos had been Rebecca's college roommate, someone I'd met at family gatherings and considered a friend. The realization that Rebecca's criminal activities had infected even our social circle made me feel physically ill. We believe Miss Santos recruited your sister into the organization. She specialized in identifying potential recruits who were financially desperate and had access to family members with substantial assets. So Rebecca was both perpetrator and victim. In a sense, yes. The organization used sophisticated psychological manipulation to convince recruits that they were helping their families by redistributing wealth from successful relatives to those in need. They were taught to view themselves as equalizers rather than thieves. The explanation provided context for Rebecca's behavior but didn't excuse it. Understanding the manipulation she'd experienced helped me comprehend how she'd justified her actions, but it didn't diminish the harm she'd caused or the choices she'd made. Over the following weeks, I worked with federal agents to identify and contact potential victims. The conversations were heartbreaking. Family after family had experienced the same pattern of theft, denial, and manipulation that I'd endured. Many victims had never reported the crimes because they couldn't bear to send relatives to prison. One case particularly affected me. Margaret Williams, a retired teacher from Phoenix, had lost her entire retirement savings to her grandson. The young man had convinced her that he was investing her money in cryptocurrency opportunities that would multiply her wealth. Instead, he'd used her life savings to fund his gambling addiction and pay debts to the criminal organization. I kept thinking something was wrong, Margaret told me during our phone conversation. The stories didn't add up, the paperwork looked fake, and he wouldn't let me talk to the investment advisor directly. But he's my grandson, I raised him when his parents couldn't. How do you call the police on someone you love? Her story resonated deeply because I recognized the impossible choice she'd faced. The person stealing from her wasn't a stranger, it was someone she'd loved, protected, and sacrificed for. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was emotional, psychological, and spiritual. Margaret, you're not responsible for his choices. Loving someone doesn't mean accepting theft from them. But what if I'd been wrong? What if there really was a legitimate investment opportunity and I ruined his future by being suspicious? The conversation highlighted the cruel psychological trap these criminals created. They exploited their victims' love and trust while simultaneously making those same emotions feel like character flaws. Victims were made to feel guilty for being suspicious of behavior that was genuinely suspicious. As I worked with more families, I began developing a protocol for helping family fraud victims recognize and report crimes. The process involved validating their instincts, providing evidence-gathering techniques, and connecting them with resources for emotional support during what was inevitably a traumatic experience. The work was emotionally draining but deeply meaningful. Every victim I helped find justice felt like partial redemption for the years I'd spent doubting my own perceptions. The family members who'd called me paranoid for investigating Rebecca's behavior had been wrong, and now I was helping other people trust their instincts instead of dismissing them. 6 months into the consulting work, I received another unexpected call. This one was from the federal prison in Oregon, where Rebecca was serving her sentence. "Sarah, I know I have no right to ask this, but I need to speak with you. It's about the other victims." Her voice sounded different, older, more subdued, but also clearer somehow. The desperation and manipulation that had characterized our last conversations were absent, replaced by something that sounded like genuine remorse. "I don't think that's a good idea, Rebecca. I have information that could help recover money for people the organization stole from, but I'll only share it with you." The offer was tempting but felt like another manipulation. Rebecca had proven herself capable of sophisticated deception, and I couldn't trust that this wasn't another scheme designed to gain sympathy or early release. Why me? Why not work directly with federal agents? Because they see me as a criminal trying to reduce her sentence. You see me as a person who made terrible choices. I need someone to believe that I genuinely want to help the people I hurt. Against my better judgment and Agent Martinez's advice, I agreed to visit Rebecca in prison. The facility was stark and institutional, designed to remove any comfort or dignity from the experience of incarceration. Rebecca looked older than her years, her hair now streaked with gray, and her face bearing the weight of years spent contemplating her choices. "Thank you for coming," she said, settling across from me at a small table in the visiting room. "I wasn't sure you would. I'm here for the other victims, not for you. I understand, and I'm grateful you're willing to help them, even if it means talking to me." Rebecca produced a manila folder containing handwritten notes and photocopied documents. The organization kept detailed records of every victim, every stolen dollar, and every hidden asset. I memorized locations of safe deposit boxes, offshore accounts, and cryptocurrency wallets before they were destroyed. The information she provided was extraordinarily detailed and potentially valuable for recovering stolen assets. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this generosity came with strings attached. "Why are you doing this now? You've been in prison for years. Why didn't you provide this information during your trial?" Because I was still angry. Still convinced that everyone else was responsible for my problems. It took years of therapy and education programs to understand what I'd really done to people. She paused, looking directly at me for the first time during our conversation. "Sarah, I stole your money, but I also stole your ability to trust your own family. I made you question every relationship, doubt every interaction. That might be the worst thing I did." The acknowledgement of psychological harm alongside financial theft felt surprisingly validating. Most people focused on the monetary losses, but the emotional damage had been far more lasting and difficult to repair. "Do you remember what you said to me that night at Volunteer Park? That I couldn't understand desperate choices, because everything had always worked out for me." Rebecca nodded, shame visible in her expression. "That wasn't true. I'd worked for everything I had. I'd made sacrifices and careful choices to build financial security. You took that away from me and then blamed me for having it in the first place. You're right. I convinced myself that your success came easily because it was painful to acknowledge how hard you'd worked while I'd made destructive choices." The conversation lasted 2 hours, during which Rebecca provided detailed information about hidden assets and victim identification. But more importantly, she offered something I hadn't realized I needed: genuine acknowledgement of the full scope of harm her actions had caused. The information Rebecca provided led to the recovery of over $2 million in stolen assets, money that was distributed among victims through a federal restitution program. Margaret Williams received enough to partially restore her retirement savings. Dozens of other families recovered at least portions of their losses. But perhaps more valuable than the financial recovery was the validation these families received. Their instincts had been correct, their suspicions had been justified. The family members who'd called them paranoid had been wrong. Working on these cases taught me that family fraud isn't just about money, it's about the fundamental violation of trust that makes human relationships possible. When someone we love steals from us, they don't just take our assets, they take our ability to trust our own perceptions and maintain healthy relationships with others. The consulting work eventually evolved into a non-profit organization dedicated to helping family fraud victims.
We provide investigation resources, emotional support, and advocacy for people navigating the impossible choice between seeking justice and protecting family relationships. 5 years later, as I sat in my office reviewing case files for the foundation, I reflected on the unexpected journey that had begun with a confusing bank statement at 3:47 a.m. Rebecca's theft had devastated my finances and shattered my family relationships, but it had also revealed strengths I didn't know I possessed and led to work that felt genuinely meaningful. The girl who'd been called paranoid for noticing inconsistencies had become a woman who helped others trust their instincts and seek justice for financial crimes. The experience that had nearly destroyed my faith in family had ultimately strengthened my belief in the importance of holding people accountable for their actions, regardless of blood relationships. Rebecca would be eligible for parole in 3 years. I didn't know if I would ever speak with her again outside of official proceedings. The relationship we'd shared as children was gone forever, replaced by the complex legacy of her crimes and their consequences. But I'd learned that forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation, and healing doesn't require forgetting. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their destructive behavior, even when that refusal causes pain for everyone involved. The foundation continued to grow, helping hundreds of families each year navigate the complex process of recognizing and reporting financial crimes committed by relatives. Each success felt like evidence that pain could be transformed into purpose, that trauma could become a source of strength for helping others. And late at night, when I reviewed financial records and investigated suspicious patterns, I remembered that being called paranoid had actually been a compliment. It meant I was paying attention, asking questions, and refusing to accept convenient lies that protected criminals at the expense of their victims. Sometimes the people who love us most are also the people most capable of hurting us. But sometimes the experiences that hurt us most also teach us the most about our own resilience and capacity for helping others heal from similar wounds. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.